next speaker, we're honored to have Jowell Lydon. He's giving his second speech in the Toastmasters manual to organize your speech. He's a graduate of Columbia University, where he was an English major, and that's in New York City. He describes himself as a senior technical writer for NetIQ, a software company, but his business card says Senior Information Developer. Well, I'm a bean counter. I'm very impressed with that title. That's a pretty good title. He's a runner, a roller blader. He's into digital photography. This guy has flown a sailplane. Little known fact. In high school, he became an ordained minister in the Universal Life Church. So he could get a press pass and park wherever you wanted. I give you Jowell Lydon speaking on, get this, do nights, K-N-I-G-H-T, rhyme with light or with cricket? Jowell.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Fellow Toastmasters, Henry David Thoreau once said of the English language, "When I read some of the rules for speaking and writing the English language correctly, I think, any fool can make a rule, and every fool will mind it." Now, I think he's giving himself license to bend the rules of English grammar, which most good writers do. But I think he's making a good point. If you look at the English language, it's full of the strangest spellings and pronunciations, and some really quirky grammar. And, you know, if you look at it, it really does look like maybe it was written by a room full of people who were maybe somewhat deranged. There's another often quoted source of wisdom, the person named Anonymous, who we all probably know, who takes a slightly more sinister slant to English. And she says, writing English is the most ingenious torture ever devised for sins committed in previous lives. And for anyone who's had to learn English, even as a native speaker, and I really admire people who've had to learn it as a second language, I think we all know what that person's talking about. So personally, I think it really doesn't take foolishness as much as a certain kind of genius to be able to learn and understand and speak and write English. And I'd like to take an excerpt from a poem. It's a poem actually all about the pronunciation of English. Hope you all can see the visual aid here. And the poem says, or the first verse says, "Dearest creature in creation, study English pronunciation. I will teach you in my verse sounds like corpse, core, horse, and worse. I will keep you, Susie, busy. Make your head with heat grow dizzy. Tear and eye your dress will tear. So shall I, oh, hear my prayer." So those are words that look the same, but are pronounced very differently. And there's another verse from actually a different poem that makes things even more difficult. And that verse says, "I take it you already know of tough and bow and cough and dough. On hiccup, oh, others may stumble, but not you. On hiccup, thorough, slough, and through. Well done, and now you wish perhaps to learn of less familiar traps." So again, a whole bunch of words in English that are spelled very similarly, and yet the pronunciation, if you didn't hear it and didn't know, there'd be really no way to tell how to pronounce those words. And then we have words like actual, but we pronounce bill. Words like viscous, but we say viscount. We also have drought, but pronounced draft. With all this weirdness going on, I think it's appropriate to appropriate from some very weird and very funny masters of the English language, namely Monty Python. And in their movie, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, there's a well-known scene where a French guard taunts King Arthur and his knights. And he says to them in a very outrageous French accent, "I blow my nose at you, so-called Arthur King, you and all your silly English kniggets." And I think what Monty Python is saying is that it's really not such a far stretch when we look at how strange English is to look at the word knight and think you might pronounce it knigget. So how is it possible for any one of us to learn all these pronunciations and spellings and find our way through the English language, which I find to be one of the strangest languages I've ever encountered? Well, unless you're a native speaker, I think you pretty much have to rely on memorization. Or if you're like me and you love words and you love language, maybe you get more engaged. And to let you know what kind of a word nerd I actually am, I notice this thing in the language all the time that are called homophones. And homophones are words that sound the same, but have very different meanings. And some of those you're probably used to. These are the things that just drove me nuts in my 3rd grade grammar class. Words like to and to and to, and I always use the wrong word. Or your and your, or it's and its. And I don't know if you all noticed, but these get misused on billboards around town all the time. I even see them misused in magazines and newspapers. So somewhere along the line, editors aren't really learning their English language very well. I found one website that said that there are actually 99 homophones in the English language, and I think there are probably more. And I think what I found interesting or fascinating about homophones is that if you misuse them, you can get yourself off to sort of a silly beginning, or even maybe get yourself in trouble. Certainly not an auspicious beginning. If you make mistakes with homophones and say things like, he's a real serial killer. Well, unless the guy's really into big breakfasts, he's not a serial killer. Or if you said to someone about a woman, you need to give her a wide berth, and you spell that with an I, you might get slapped in the face. And then there's always the statement about people going to church to pray, spelled with an E. So adds a sinister twist to something that's otherwise very sacred and holy. So I think that finding your way through the maze of the English language, as I hope I've shed some light on, is not such an easy task. It's full of pitfalls and perils that I think have trapped all of us at one time or another. If nothing else, I hope you leave this evening and never look at the word night the same way again. And I'd like to follow in the tradition of Shakespeare and end at the beginning and return to the poem on English verse. And that poem says, it's the last verse in the poem. It says, a dreadful language? Man alive. I learned to speak it when I was 5, and yet to write it, the more I sigh. I'll not learn how until the day I die.